Today we'll be doing February March 23, paper 2-2, the last question, scenario-based question. And in order to solve this, we'll be doing three very important steps. The first would be to plan. Then secondly, we will visualize all the arrays, all the values, all the variables with some dummy values. And then finally, we'll write the code, okay? It's generally recommended that you spend at least 20 minutes on this question and we'll be doing it accordingly, okay? All right, so the question states that we have a 1D array called team name that contains the name of the teams in a sports team, okay? So that is the 1D array. And then we have a 2D array called team points, which contains the points awarded for each match. The position of each team's data in two arrays is the same. Okay, this is the most important part of the question, and this is a recurring statement in all of the questions that you'll come across for 15 marks. The idea is that you have a 1D array. Okay, so we can visualize the 1D array like this with multiple indices, and then so like this would be a 1D array, and then a 2D array is sort of a table with rows and columns. So you have some rows and then you have some columns, right? So this would be your 2D array, and it will have multiple values. Let's say question mark, question mark, question mark. So instead of visualizing the array here horizontally, we can, just do it vertically. It doesn't make any difference because we're just visualizing it right now. Then it says the variable league size contains the number of teams in the league, and the variable match number contains the number of matches played. All the teams have played the same number of matches. Then you have this point system. If you guys watch football, you must know how the point system works. And then we have to do some stuff. Okay, we'll come to this afterwards. First, let's actually visualize. The first part we plan and then we visualize. So here I have an array, 1D array called team names. So I have some dummy values here that I've pointed out in the second part. This is visualization part as well, along with planning. So you put in some values here. Again, this is only for your understanding. If you want to not do this, that is also fine, but this helps. Then the question tells us that there is a variable league size. We don't know what the value is. We don't need to know that. We can just assume it will be some random number. Okay, so we have this 1D array team name, and it has these team names. Again, the size of array doesn't matter. All right, so this is clearly in front of us. Then we have the 2D array team points. Team points contains the points awarded for each match. The position of each team's data is the same, and then every team has played a certain number of matches that we know from here. Okay, match number. So there are two variables here, league size and match number. The league size is the number of teams, and then the match number is the number of matches each team has played. How do you decide which value is on the row and which is on the column? This is the main part where they've told you that the indices are the same. The position of each team's data in the array is same. For example, the team stored at index 10 is the same in both arrays. That means if I were to look at, let's say, city, second index, so at the second index of my team name, I can also find the data relevant to city on the second row of my team points 2D array. So this means that if I look at these values, so city, row 2, match 1, they got 2 points, match 2, they got 1 point, match 3, they got 1 point, match 4, they got 2 points, so on and so forth, all the way till match number. Match number was the total number of matches each team has played. This is how your standard league table looks like at any given point. So we are exactly mapping the same thing here. All right, so this is the first and the most important part. Once you have visualized these arrays, only then you can understand what to do further. Okay, so all the mapping is same. Then we maybe have bind. So bind is at the 6th index, and at the 6th row of our 2D array, we will have all the points from match 1 all the way till match number. Okay. Again, what was match number? This contains the number of matches played. So it is very, obvious that this will go on the columns because every team would have played a certain number of matches, and this will go on the row, the league size, because this is the number of teams that you'll have in your 2D array. Okay, now we move towards the question. So the arrays and variables have already been set up and the data stored. So you are not going to take any inputs. Okay, then each data can be played at home or away. So these points are given. 3 is away, 2 is home, 1 is drawn, and 0 is lost. So here you can start mapping things and you can start connecting the dots. So we have two arrays. So we have a 1D array, we have a 2D array, we have two variables, and then we have some point system. So here you can clearly see that we'll either have to use case of otherwise or we'll have to use if else. So it's totally up to you how do you want to do this. Points are scored for each match. Again, that's already done. So we have visualized this with random values. Write a program that meets the following requirements, calculates the total points for all the matches played for each team. First, let's look at this one by one. You need to calculate the points for all matches played for each team. So how do you calculate that? Essentially, if you know 2D arrays, we have the rows and we have the columns. And as the question said, that all the data of each team is put in a certain row of the team points. So if we talk about, let's say, Barca, so at the third row of the 2D array, we have all these points. So essentially what we have to do is we have to sum them, right? And in order to sum them, we just have to add all the values in each column for the current row. That's the idea. So before you go on to the next row, you need to save some of this data in a variable or in a data structure. So in that case, we can make a new array on our own and we'll call it total. What will totals do? That once we have added all the points for a certain team, we will save them in the totals array. Same index, okay? So Madrid is at index 1 in team name. So the total should also be at the first index of the totals array. Then PSG is the last team. So all the points of PSG will go in the last row. And then similarly, PSG's total would also be in the last row of our totals array. All right. Then in the second part, it says counts the total number of away wins, home wins, drawn matches, and lost matches for each team. So if that is the case, again, while you are summing all the values one by one, the totaling concept that we learned from the syllabus, you are going to use some if conditions or case of otherwise to count as well. So if value is 1, that simply means that you are going to count this as a draw. If value is 2, then you are going to count this as a home win, so on and so forth. So for each row, we are iterating all the column, okay? Or in simple terms, for each team, we are going through all the match points. And then output for each team, the name, total points, the total, stats. And at the end, you have to output the name of the team with highest and the lowest points. Okay, so this is where our totals array would come in handy. Here we'll have some values. Maybe I'll just add a couple of values, 72, 65, 23, something like this. Okay, so now once we have the array ready, the question says now you have to output the name of the team with the highest and the lowest point. So then we only need to look at this array. We don't need to look at the 2D array. Okay, the totals array will find the largest value. In our case, it's the first value. So we'll go and we'll check the team name. That will obviously be on the same index in the other array, team name. So it would be Madrid. And then the team with the lowest points, we have this team, and we need to output the name that will get from the team name array. That will be Bayern. Okay, so we'll be using the same mechanisms of maximum and minimum. Okay, so planning is out of the way now. Now we can actually start and implement the solution. You must use pseudocode or program code and add comments to explain how your code works. We'll get into this as well. So comments are very, very important. In fact, if I show you the marking scheme quickly, how the marking is done is very important to know before you actually attempt this question. So what do you need to do in such a question is you will be given marks based on the amount of programming techniques that you use. Okay, so by programming techniques, we're looking at if conditions, loops, arrays, etc. Okay, so even if you don't understand the question properly, you can still use the right techniques and you'll be rewarded for that. And then to get maximum marks for this AO3 assessment objective 3, you need to write correct code. It should be logical, it should be fully commented, it should have meaningful identified names, and it should be in logical order. Okay? So I'll explain it as we go along. All the inputs must and outputs must contain suitable messages, and you do not need to initialize any data. So you don't need to do this in code. All the points that I filled, all the team names I filled, we are assuming that it's already done for us. So for now, we'll only be looking at team name and team point. Okay, so let's start. Okay, in the first part, we have to actually calculate the total points for all the matches played for each team. Okay, so we'll go, point by point, but only after we have planned it fully. Otherwise, you must always, plan it properly. Okay, so the first point says total points for all matches played for each team. That means you need to iterate through your 2D array, select the row, and sum all the values, right? So for that, we need a nested loop. So we'll start with a nested loop. So for row and for column, a loop within a loop, that is a nested loop. 1, 2. Okay, so how many rows do we have? We have rows for league size. So league size. And then nested loop says for column 1, 2, match number. Why match number? Because this is the number of columns that we have. So this is the number of rows, league size, and then 1 till match number. This is the number of columns that we have. Okay, so this is how we iterate through the 2D array. I'll keep adding comments as we go along. So iterating through, the name of the array is team points array. Then in the next part, we are expected to find the total points for all matches played for each team. So we have to pick the first row, find the sum, and then save it in this totals array. Then we need to do the same for the second, third, all the way till the end. Okay, so how do we find total? If you remember, how is totaling done? Totaling is simply total is equal to total plus some value. Okay, so in our case, it would be a bit different because we are using arrays. So how do we do that? I'll just remove this. Okay, for that we need a totals array. So we're saying that whatever the current row is, add the value from team points current row column. Okay, this simply means that you are going to get current points and total. Okay, so team points row comma column. Initially the row would be 1 and column would be 1, and then column would become 2, and then column would become 3. So the row and column values would change like this. First row, first column, then it becomes, the row remains the same because this is the outer loop. Inner column becomes 2, then 3, then 4, so on and so forth. So what we're saying is that you get the first row and the first column's value, that is 1. Then you get the first row, second column value, that is 2. Then you get first row, third column, that is 1. Then you get first row, fourth column, that is 3, etc. Okay, so we are essentially getting all the team points one by one, and we are adding them in the totals array. Okay, so totals array would initially be empty, but by the time we have iterated through one team in this 2D array, so we would have one total corresponding to that team name. All right, so this array we need to declare. Okay, this is not made for us. So here, first of all, we need to declare totals. So declare totals as an array. Again, I'm using the pseudocode guide as for the pseudocode syntax. It's uploaded in the drive folder as well. So leak size of type integer. Okay, why till leak size? Because this is the number of rows that I have in my 2D array and my 1D array. So the total should also correspond to that for each team. Okay, so I'm adding all the points for each row into my totals row. Okay, so this is good enough. We can also bring the comment like this. Okay, it's better to read like this. Then in the next part, the question says you need to count the total number of away wins, homes, drawn matches, and lost matches for each team. Okay, so now we have to compare. If the points are equal to 3, then that's an away win, home win, drawn, or lost. So
Sir, why did you declare totals? I thought the question said that we didn't need to declare anything.
No. We need to declare totals because these are the arrays that are made for you, okay? Not the new one. Do you follow?
Sir, isn't like the third last line saying you do not need to declare any arrays, variables, or constants?
Yes, it says that, but it doesn't hurt because kuch questions where it's not given, okay?
Sir, so if we do declare, they won't cut marks.
No, obviously they won't cut marks.
Okay.
Okay, so going back, now we need to get each point and then we need to check if it is 3, 2, or 1 or 0. So how do we get each value from the 2D array? We need to get these one by one, and we already have them under this identifier, team points, row, comma, column. So if I were to just write output, if I were just to output team points, row, comma, column. So as I said before, this would output 1, then 2, 1, 3, etc., all the way till 1. So instead of repeating this over and over again, this is a bit lengthy name, so we can just save it in some other variable. Let's call it points like this, and let's use this variable. Again, you don't need to do this. This is purely optional. This would just help you save time in the exam. So I'll replace team points with PTS. Okay. All right. Now we need to count points. So counting points for each type of stack. Okay, so here you can use if else ifs. I'll use case of because it's much simpler to do it that way. Again, if the point is 1, so that would be drawn match, so we need to have some counters here. So we'll write case of points, and then we have 4 cases here. We have 3, 2, 1, 0. So we have 3, we have 2, we have 1, we have 0. All right, so we need to count them. So we'll have 4 counters here: away, home, draw, lost. So I'll just use this. Away is equal to away plus 1. This is incrementing. Then we have home is equal to home plus 1. Then we have drawn is equal to drawn plus 1. And finally, we have lost is equal to lost plus 1. You can use other variable names as well. Error handling technique. So, and then the end case. All right, so till this point, what we have done is we went through all the points for each team. We kept on adding them in our totals array, which we are updating after we have iterated through whole one row for each team. And at the same time, we're also counting how many points did each team get based on the points that we're getting from the 2D array from this one. All right, and then we made 4 counters. Then it says output for each team. Okay, so for each team, now we have to output the name, the total points, and the total number of away, win, home, drawn, and lost matches. Okay, so again, we need to look at this nested loop here. Nested loop for each row, this works for column number of times. So if I were to simply output, let's say away here, or maybe let's print any other, let's print PTS. Okay, if I were to output points here, so it will output them as many times as the match number. So let's say if the match number value is 10, so this will output the same value 10 times. Okay, we don't want to repeat these stats 10 times. We only want to print it for each team. So this has to be done outside the nested loop. Reason, Reason is, once you have run the whole inner loop, that means you must have looked at all the values in one row. So for one row, you have seen all the columns, you have saved the value in the totals array, you have counted the points. Now, once you're done with this, before you go on to the next row, in our case, it would be city, we need to output some data as we are requested. So here at this point, we don't need to do anything further. So I will say next call. Okay, so this is again nested. So you can look at the indentation here. And then for row, this we need to, okay. Now, in between this part, this is the code that will execute. So code runs before going to the next team. Okay, so before we go to the next row or before we go to the next team, this is the code that will run. Now we have to output the name. Okay, so output name. So the name is stored in the team name array, and we have the rows here. This is 1D array. So row 1, row 2, row 3. So I'll say output team name row. Okay, again, why am I not using call here? First of all, because we are outside this inner loop, so we cannot access call. And secondly, we don't want to output it multiple times. We only want to output it once. So inner, sorry, the outer loop is the value that is changing for each row. 1, then 2, then 3. Okay, so we need to use row here. Okay, so this is not good enough because the question clearly states that you need to output with suitable messages. So you need to output it properly. You should say team name like this. You can skip the call. All right. Then in the next part, it says output the total points for each team. So we already have the total points. We saved them in the totals index row. So we can say total points, comma totals row. Again, why are we using the row index? Because totals array is also 1D array. So if you're looking at Madrid index 1, so we know for sure that the current row, that is the first row, will contain the total points for Madrid, so on and so forth for the remaining team. Then they're saying output the total number of away wins, home wins, drawn matches, and lost matches. So for that, we can simply output home, away, drawn, lost stats, and you can output them in the same line. This would be home, away, draw, lost. Okay, you need to use these variables that we made. Exactly. If you make them uppercase or lowercase, if you don't spell them correctly, then you will lose marks. So by this part, we have done all these requirements that were given to us. Okay, now we only have to do the largest and the smallest total points and the team names who won or lost the league. Okay, so we can do it in the same loop, but it will get a bit confusing, so I'll do it in another loop. Okay, now the idea is, once you have all the totals here in this array, once you have seen through all the teams, once you have calculated all the team points for the 2D array, now you have an array full of totals with some random values for each team. So now we need to iterate through that. So our loop ends here, and now we need to find the largest and the smallest number of points for teams. And if we just look at the dummy value, again, these are the dummy data values. You don't need to write specific code. Okay, the code should be generic always. But in our case, the loser team would be Bayern and the winning team should be Madrid. And we will actually test it in the end to make sure that this works correctly. Okay, so I'll just add some comment here. Maybe we are finding or calculating the teams with highest and lowest points. Okay, so now we need to make new variables so that they should be declared. Although sometimes in the question that is not a requirement, but just to be on the safe side, you should. So we have max. We need to find the index as well. Again, so 90 is the largest value in the totals array. So we need to connect it with the team name array. So we need to get the index, this position, index 1. Similarly, for the lowest team, we need to get this position, index 6. So we have declared max. Then let's say index max. Then we have min. Then we have index min, and all of these should be integers. Then we are going to assume that max and minimum are both on the first index of my totals. Why is that the case? The reason is we don't want to guess a random value. Okay, it could be too large. Let's say if I make maximum to be maybe a very small negative value, or maybe I make set my max to 30. So you cannot say for sure that no team would have values larger than 30, okay, or less than 30. So it's always the safest assumption that you always make the first value of the array as your maximum and your minimum, which helps you avoid any second guessing and keeps the response very logical. So here we assume, make the assumption. So assume first index value to be max and min. And now in the next part, we just have to check. So max and min are both pointing to 90 right now. So for every value we'll compare, is 88 larger than the maximum? No. Is 88 less than the minimum? Yes. So minimum becomes 88. Then we check, is 40 larger than 90? No. Is 40 less than 88? Yes. So minimum becomes equal to 40. Then we have 72. Is 72 less than 40? No. Is 72 larger than 90? No. Is 65 less than 40? No. Is it larger than 90? Again, no. Then we have 23. Is it less than 40? Yes. So this becomes the new min. 23 becomes the new min. And 23 is not larger than 90, so 90 remains the max. And we'll do the same thing for the remaining value. And this is the whole algorithm. We have to compare every time, and if one of the value is larger or smaller, we'll update it accordingly. So again, for this, we need to iterate through the array. So we need to iterate from the first team till the last. How do we know how many values do we have? It was given in the question that the total number of teams would be equal to league size. So we run the loop for, let's say, J1 to league size. Then we are going to compare the values. Again, you can store the current points, this value that you'll be getting one by one in a separate variable. This is totally optional, just helps you save time in the exam. So you can say current maybe, and current may will get totals index I, in our case J. Okay, so when J is 1, so we are getting the first value of totals, that would be 90. When J would be 2, this would get the second value, that would be 88. So I replace it with J. And then we are checking if current is larger than the maximum value, which is currently set to the first index. So we are checking if that is the case. Is 90 greater than 90? That is not true. You can also start the loop from the second index, okay? Just to avoid the first iteration, but it's pretty much the same. You won't lose marks if you start from 1. So if your current value is greater than the maximum value, just like in our case, 80. So 80 is not larger than 90, so it remains that way. And if it had been the other case, so we would have set max to the current value of totals J, which is equal to current. We've already replaced this value in current. And then we also need to save the index, okay? So how do we save the index? I'll explain that in a bit. Then else if current is less than minimum, then we need to save the current value in the minimum. And we also need to save the index. So let's use the index min variable that we created, and we need to save the value of J. Okay, what is going on here? So here, when we started with min, we said 90 is the minimum value, and then 88 became the minimum value. So the indices are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so on. So initially, 90 is at index 1, this is the minimum value. We say 88 is the new minimum now. So 88 is at index 2. This is the value of J of your loop variable. So you are able to get the index like this. Yeah, I'll underline it. Then you find another min. So the new min is now 40. So this becomes the min, and your index becomes equal to 3. So you just need to save the value of J wherever it meets the criteria. Then you have 72. 72 does not satisfy the condition. Then 65 doesn't satisfy the condition. Then 23. Since 23 is lesser than 40, so it becomes the new minimum, and then we save the value of 6 from J into this variable in min. We are just saving the index. Again, the reason is, if we do not save the index, we cannot print the team name because we don't know where the team name is stored, in which index. So now we know the minimum is at index 6. So we'll know that it's team bar. That's it. So we end if and we do next J. And the only thing left to do now is that we need to output the team names with highest and the lowest points. We don't need to actually output the points, but even if you do, that is totally fine. So I'll do it with team names and points. So outputting winners and losers of the league. So you can say output team name index largest value would be, sorry, so this should be index max equal to J. Okay, you also need to do the same thing for the largest value. So this should be index max 1 by a total of comma, and you can use the max value here. All right, so max would save the current number of points. So in our case, the largest number of points was 90. And then you need to do the same thing for the minimum. So team name and min lost by a total of comma min. So with this, we have printed the team is okay. So index max, we would have gotten index 1, that is 90. So it should have printed Madrid, which is correct. So this should print Madrid 1 by a total of 90. And then the second part should have been in min. We saved the value of J in min. This is where we found the smallest value. That was in our case 23. We don't have the values next to it. We just assume random values. And this was at index 6. So at index 6, we have bind. So this should have printed bind lost by a total of 23. And with this, the question ends. So this was pretty much the whole 15-mark question. And this is how you plan, execute, and visualize the whole problem.